This episode is brought to you by TaxAct. Don't do your taxes alone. Join TaxAct's National Admin Night. Admin nights are social gatherings for getting through your to-do list. So get ready for a night of fun, finding deductions, and filing taxes with TaxAct, where you can file your federal and state return for just $49 through April 8. Let's get together and get them over with. Visit taxact.com/admin-night for details.
This episode is brought to you by Fandango. People say fans are too distracted these days, but the truth is, when a great movie hits the screen, you show up, you stay glued, invested, part of the story. And without fans like you, there'd be no cinema magic, no shared moments. So head to Fandango.com to get tickets, stream, or rent or buy top movies and series. Fandango loves fans.
Refreshing wild cherry cola meets smooth cream. The treat you deserve. Pepsi Wild Cherry and Cream. Treat yourself.
Life doesn't treat 80s pop stars well when they're not being 80s pop stars.
Hello, and welcome to another new episode of Live Through That. I'm your host, Mike Hipple, and on this podcast, we dig deeper into the pivotal moments that shaped the lives of some of my favorite artists from the 80s and 90s. Just a note that the podcast is approaching a big milestone, our 100th episode. We've got a special episode planned, so be sure to subscribe so that you won't miss an episode. This week, we've got Belouis Some on the show. He was one of the more distinctive voices to emerge from the British New Wave scene of the 1980s and had worldwide hits with Some People, Imagination, and Round Round, the last of which found an entirely new audience when it landed on the soundtrack of John Hughes' Pretty in Pink. Along the way, he worked with some remarkable collaborators, including Bernard Edwards from Chic and guitarist Carlos Alomar, the man who helped shape David Bowie's mid-1970s sound. After more than 30 years away from the headlining stage, he returned to London's O2 Academy in November 2024 for a sold-out show, followed by a US tour in 2025. Today, he tells us about how a change of scenery from London to New York City helped craft his breakthrough song, Imagination.
I'd like been through the process of trying to get a recording contract for years, like everyone, playing places and putting various bands together and not working. And it never really worked for me for being a band because I knew what I wanted, and musicians, they perhaps the ones I found weren't as driven. I always think that if you have 5 members or 4 members in a band, it's like winning the lottery. I mean, because the odds of you staying together are, 5 young souls managing it to keep together is so rare. I mean, so I had all these different bands, and just there was always some reason why, 2 people couldn't turn up for rehearsal, the usual stuff. And then the writing, none of them could write songs. Funnily enough, one of my bands, which I was only thinking about this recently, which didn't last for long, but I tried, but he had already had a lineup and I sort of tried to incorporate them, was a guy called Graham Edwards, who was a bass player at the time. And he went on to become part of a fantastic, very successful writing team. Graham and I can't remember, Christy, and they wrote all the, lots of stuff for Korn and for Skater Girl and all that stuff, and had a lot of big hits. I mean, I think she's still writing. I think their daughters are still doing it. But at the time, Graham was a bass player from Aberdeen, But I'm just giving you, that's one minor example. But I worked with lots of different people. Anyway, I eventually got my recording contract, put a band together, but I paid them. So they had to do what they were told. We did fantastic gigs. I got a recording contract. That just took 3 years. And then I started recording my album in London, and I was with some great people, again, people I worked with for a long time afterwards, but we were very young. I mean, Guy Fletcher, who's been in Dire Straits for the last 30, 40 years, and Chester came and everyone. But we were sitting in the studio, and the producer kept on disappearing. So eventually we found out he was a heroin addict, but he disappeared. I'm just popping out to see someone, come back 4 days later, one of those. So we'd stayed in the studio and we started, we got on with it. We started recording and no one at the record company would believe me. So I was ringing up and saying, the producer, he doesn't turn up very often. Is that normal? Oh, yeah, you're a new artist. Do it. You just do it. Anyway, the long and short of it is I recorded the album, but I wasn't happy at all. And I fired my manager because he was not helping. And I was not in a good place. And then someone said, you should do, our last chance really, we'll do a remix with these two people in New York, Michael Barbiero and Steve Thompson. And these stories always sound so long-winded and boring, but the Steve Thompson was a DJ on Long Island, and but he had great ears and he knew what everyone wanted. So I came over to New York. I'd never been to America and I didn't want to come. Got off the plane and fell in love with the place straight away. The energy, the vibe, and it was so positive. Went in the studio. We did a mix, and I said to him at the end of it, my album's rubbish. If I don't bail it out, I'm going to get dropped. Do you fancy producing some songs for me? I'm not sure they're going to let me, but would you be up for it? And they said, well, we've been looking for an artist to produce because we're just mixers and they won't let us produce anyone. So I went back to London and then we all worked it. And at the same time as Steve had met Carlos Alomar, David Bowie's guitarist, and Carlos had never worked with Bernard Edwards and Tony Thompson. They were obviously old friends from Chic. And so Carlos said, well, I'll get Tony and Bernard. Steve said, I've got Neville, Belouis Some. And we all sort of blagged each other's organization, if you know what I mean. I told EMI I had the foolproof setup in New York. They said they had a foolproof setup in New York for London. And I got on a plane, came over to New York, and we recorded Imagination, which is my, signature track, really. And we did that in an afternoon. I mean, the process to get there was quite a long time. And there was some skullduggery involved. I had to, in those days, we had faxes, and the fax came through with the budget was $30,000 and I knocked a zero off, I mean, we'd got to the stage where I was pretty desperate, so, EMI wasn't going to say no to a $3,000 budget in New York with Bernard and Tony and Carlos. So we did it and it was a hit, I knew it was a hit. I came back and said, here's your hit,
You said that initially you didn't want to come to America.
No, I was very English. I had an English sound and I got an English sort of sounding voice. And I thought, what do I want to go to those Americans for? I've got my guys in London. We know what we're doing and we've got great ideas. And we did have great ideas. We just couldn't put them on vinyl. That's something I've always found. And then, of course, I was locked into actually preferring to always be playing with American guys. Listen, I love English musicians, but American musicians, they get what I'm thinking without over-interpreting it, and so the American guys were great, and Steve was great, and I wanted to make my second album with Steve, but again I had political battles, and but I'm very English sounding, and I was singing a very English sounding song with New York's finest R&B musicians, and it worked, I think. And we did the whole album. I persuaded them to do the whole album. So that was it,
That album came out in 1985. And besides Imagination, it also featured the hit Some People. 2 more records followed. Then Belouis took a long hiatus. What was happening at that time?
I got pissed off. I just thought, what's the point? I mean, the emotional input for an album. I mean, I don't know what it's like nowadays, but for me to write an album and to record it was a tremendous amount of pain and emotional input. And, I believed it, when I wrote those songs. I didn't write them for a laugh. I didn't go what they have now. They have songwriting workshops. Oh, fuck that. I mean, you wrote a song because you believed in something and you wanted to say something, not because you sat there with a load of other guys going, hey, I've got an hour and a half for you this morning and I've got an hour and a half for you this afternoon. It wasn't like that. I wrote these songs. They were my songs, and they meant something to me. So when I went and recorded them, then to have a record company, and the Parlophone, Capitol, EMI were fantastic, but I got stuck on BMG, Arista, and they were useless, not interested at the time. I mean, record companies changed the whole way. This was 1990s. So I just thought, oh, I'm not going to do this anymore. I'm not going to spend two and a half years making an album, pulling favors, getting people in, recording it. I made this one in London with some great people. It's a great album, the third album. I don't play it live because it's the guy who owns it he bought the rights, and when I wasn't able to, and I've tried buying them. I mean, whatever, it's politics again. So I'm not going to see anything from it. So why would I? They're great songs. I wrote them. They're there. I hopefully will get them back one day. I might re-record them, but I want to re-record them with the same passion not with AI. You know what I mean? And so that's why. So 1995, put out one more song, and I thought, firstly, I'm not making any money. I'm now 32 or 33. I haven't got any money. And I'm not being paid by my publishers who ripped me off and took all the money and didn't pay me for 10 years. I'm, in debt with my old record company, so I'm not going to see anything there. So I thought I have to go and make a living. So I opened a nightclub. It was a very big nightclub. Of course, like everything I do, I didn't realize what I was taking on. It was an old historic building in London, in Knightsbridge, which is a very lovely part of centre of London. And it was from the 1920s, and I was completely derelict. I saw this building, and I took it and I renovated it into a nightclub, restaurant, bar, and lost a fortune, as you do. It was open as I had it for a year, but I managed to bung the lease on to someone else, and it then was open for about 25 years very successfully. But with I did it, it was really cool, and the crowd was all mixed up. And that's why we lost money. And it was fun, and it was mixed ages, and it was lots of music, lots of acting. The guy who took it over, it was all footballers, and if I may say, perhaps our East European friends, and it was more flash and more expensive, and one of those, not my sort of place. Anyway, he did very well out of it, and then I went on to other things.
What type of other things?
I thought, well, how are you going to make money? So I started an adult film company, so I made 300 adult films. I mean, I wasn't in them. I produced, organized. It was my company, my idea, my concept, but we did quite well. I mean, for 10 years, we were a brand that was known worldwide. So, it was successful. I didn't talk about it a lot because but the world's changed so much. I really, 10% of, I think it's not 10%, it's something like 25, some ridiculous percentage of all teens between 18 and 25 are on OnlyFans. So what am I embarrassed about because I made films for Playboy? I don't care. That's what I did. I was UK London based, but I made them all over Europe, but they were very different from the normal stuff that the normal stuff. And I actually started selling. They did quite well in the States as well, but the brand did quite well in the States and all over Europe, and they were a bit different because they were more filmy, they were more real, they weren't not the usual full makeup and and dodgy scripts and all the stuff that the ridiculousness of that's what I hated. Was I thought, I'm not going to do that, I'm going to do it real. I mean, nice people, from like the people you see in ordinary people. This is not describing it very well, but they were what you would call amateur now, but they weren't amateur. They were girl next door type thing. When you, well, the other thing about, I didn't have a tremendously big crew. At one stage, I did start bringing in a big crew, but I realized it just ruined the whole concept. If you have hair and makeup, if you have lighting, if you have, and this is before you had small cameras, by the way. So if you have all the shenanigans, you suddenly don't have your very relaxed, with sort of more or less amateurs. There, suddenly the whole thing becomes terrifying, and you're on a film set. And I didn't like that. I liked being on location in places where you could film and people were relaxed and they weren't. Nowadays, you can do it on phones and small cameras. But when I was doing this, we were lugging these cameras around, And I did a lot. I did a lot in Italy, a lot in France. And I like to do it on location, countryside in England. And was I directing? No, but I knew what I wanted and I knew what I didn't want. I knew what I could sell. And then I had a different way of selling it. And then it took me about 5 years to get that business going. And then it started to go quite well.
Belouis is not scared to talk about his career in adult movies. It was just a way to make a living.
Life doesn't treat 80s pop stars well when they're not being 80s pop stars unless they come up with something. We're not employable. We can't go out and say, hey, I'd like to get a job, please, because people just don't want to employ you. You're trouble. You ask anyone who's done what I've done, and especially when the whole publishing and the industry starts not paying you, all the things that we all heard about. I mean, now my publishing's sorted out, it's all good. But for many years, no one paid me for anything. Getting money out of Italy. I remember asking them. I had big hits in Italy. Do I get paid publishing from Italy? Well, you might do, but it's not going to come for 2 or 3 years. You know what I mean? And that was in the 80s. So things have changed now, which they're much for the better. I mean, now when I see people on TikTok and podcasts going, yeah, well, we get this and we get that and we get it. Well, it's an instant. Yeah, they don't know how lucky they are compared with us lot in the old days trying to get our money.
Belouis Some has just resumed touring, and I was interested to know why the long hiatus.
Well, the problem was that I probably left it too long. And so I was very obstinate. I wasn't going to grovel around in the 2000s. And it was really tough because I wasn't big enough in the 80s to weather the 90s, if you know what I mean. To weather that. And really what I should have done is done what a lot of the other English acts did, is it's sort of like 2010 started doing these 80s festivals and getting things back going. But by that stage, I had a business. I had my first baby. I was large. I was, and no one really knew. I mean, my children didn't even know I was a singer until they saw it on YouTube, like 2016. So like what? And I just thought, I'm not going to be humiliated. I probably left it too long. Also, there was so then I started, getting in touch with people in New York and saying, hey, do you want to, because I always felt much more comfortable playing in America anyway. So, and eventually then COVID came and ruined the plans for 2 or 3 years because they were using all the people that they booked for that 2020 for 2021, 2022. Then I got on the Alarm tour, and then dear old Mike Peters' cancer came back. So that tour got cancelled. So last year, 2025, my own tour with Gene Loves Jezebel, Jay Aston's Gene Loves Jezebel, on the East Coast. And then the Lost Ages thing, which goes out every year. We did the whole of, we did nationwide in the States last summer. And now I'm going out again in April, end of April here on the East Coast.
What was it like getting back on stage after more than 30 years?
Very, very nice. I mean, the first time in 30 years was in London it was quite a big venue. It was the O2 in Islington. And it was a pretty good audience, but I think they came to see this 60-something-year-old guy fail. I think it was most people are retiring at the age that I went back on stage. So they were, let's go and see what happened. It was a great gig. It was just like the old days, I was a bit of stagecraft was needed polishing up. And then I did a couple more in England and then hit the road in America, where you learn very quickly. So, it came back. And it was always you ask any band, the best bit about the whole thing is being on stage. I mean, the rest of it, all the other stuff, I mean, you love everyone and you love chatting to people. You love doing interviews, you love talking about yourself. You love recording, but you really want to be on the stage, you know. I mean, that's what it's all about.
Another big pivotal moment for Belouis Some, especially in America, was his song's appearance on the Pretty in Pink soundtrack. How did that come about?
Well, you have to appreciate that in Europe, John Hughes has never meant the same as he does in the States, where it's part of your teen culture, heritage. It's your, you know, I can't give it off the top of my head. I can't give you an example here, but it's like our culture has some things that we like. Robbie Williams is big in UK, but it doesn't mean anything in the States, right? Where Pretty in Pink, Breakfast Club, and 16 Candles are big movies here, but they don't mean the same as they mean in the States. You know, it's a big chunk of American teen culture, I think. I mean, you know, that era and the Brat Pack and. So when John Hughes, he rang me up, my manager, he'd heard Imagination, really liked it. And he was a music, as you know, fanatic. And I got a phone call in the studio from this bloke, John Hughes. And it was like, I was in the studio in London doing the demos and he was very nice. And I'd sort of been warned that some guy from America was going to call me. I didn't know he was, you know, and which is a bit naive of me. And he said, I'm going to send you the script and I want you to write a song for this bit. And I'm like, yeah, of course. I have no idea what to do. Writing a song to order, as we've already discussed, is not the way I've ever written songs. You know, I'm not able to do that, you know. But I had the song Round and it sort of worked with what he was. And it's quite, I never got the rest of the lyric right. But anyway, I sent him the demo and he loved the demo. And that was the last I heard of it for about 6 months. And then I got a phone call, you got to come to America tomorrow and record it. I was like, you know, and I was in the middle of a tour. I literally had to go between dates from London to LA. I had to go to the embassy and get my thing. And I remember arriving in Los Angeles at 2 p.m, going to the studio, really jet lagged. And Bernardo was Tony Thompson. Bernard was producing it, and he had an amazing lineup of musos. And I've never been able to work out who it was. I can't remember because I switched off to it because I recorded it, got on the plane, and came back and played a big gig for me in London the next day. That when I arrived, got off the plane, and the next year I remember someone saying, "Oh, you know, Pretty in Pink's coming out." I'm like, "Oh, okay." You know, I was doing something, and of course, it was a big, and the soundtrack, as you know, is one of the biggest movie soundtracks of all time and great. And I'm very proud of it, but I didn't really think about it at the time. And you know, I think maybe 3 years later, someone said it's gold, maybe platinum and super duper. And it was only when just as time went on. And once I lived in Paris for a while and I saw Molly Ringwald having dinner. And I said to my girlfriend, who's my wife now, "Oh, look, she's in the movie that I did a song for, you know." And I was going to go and say something, and she said, "Don't." And I was going, "Yeah, go and say hi." And I should have done, actually. Anyway, but I didn't. And now I'm incredibly proud of it. And it's one of the best songs in the set. It really works and people love it. It's the answer to your very simple question. Yeah, I'm so proud of it. Yeah.
On our episode with Andy McCluskey from OMD, his story about how their song, If You Leave, came about was pretty similar.
Yeah, they did. And it's just a great song. And I think those were the only 2 songs that were written for the album or written for the movie. I think everything else he'd picked up and plonked in. And I'm very proud of that, actually, because again, something I'm very proud of now, I wasn't aware of at the time, you know, and I think that, you know, you never know you always believe as an artist, and you always hope that something's going to last forever, you know, because that's what you want it to do more than anything. That's your ultimate aim, isn't not to make money or anything, is to be admired and to get it right, to have that, you know. And some artists do it several times in their career, but you know, we're all lucky if we do it once. And obviously my one is Imagination, but I'm very proud of Round, you know.
I want to thank Belouis Some for being on the show today. Right now, he's heading out on tour in the States through May. I'll have a link in the show notes where you can see where he'll be next. And I'll end with another quick reminder that you can buy my book on 80s musicians and where they are today, 80s Redux, and its sequel, Live Through That, on 90s artists, wherever you buy your books. And if you like this show, please leave a review where you're listening. It always helps others find us. And of course, subscribe so that you won't miss an episode. Thanks for listening.